In the state of Iowa in September 1971, the mysterious disappearance of young Pam occurred. A few days later, a disturbing discovery was made in the forest. Traces of an incident were found at an old car. The investigators had several suspicious persons. Among them was a friendly stranger who had offered Pam his help. Her old acquaintance who was admitted to a psychiatric clinic shortly after the incident, and the former cellmate of her husband, at whose place a photo of the young woman was found. Cedar Rapids was known as the City of Five Seasons and was considered one of the most peaceful places in the Midwest. Therefore, the news of the incident in the forest shook the residents. From the first days of the investigation, it was clear that it would be difficult to find the guilty party. However, even a small clue could be decisive in the search for truth. Around 1840, a call came in to the local police station. The calling woman reported an unusual find that young squirrel hunters had made. The young people noticed something unusual between the trees while walking on the forest path. As they came closer, they saw a motionless figure on the trunk of a damaged car. The condition of the crime scene indicated that everything had not happened today. Shaken by what they saw, the young people hurried home to get adults. Shortly afterward, Officer Roland Ecke received a radio message about the disturbing find in the forest. The patrol officer and his partner received a message from the control center asking them to check River Road, where two passers-by had made a disturbing discovery at an old car. After about 50 meters deep in the forest, they found the place that was mentioned in the report. The first thing that struck the police was the condition of the car. It had obviously been standing here for a very long time. The weeds had grown up to the roof. Despite the precise description of the eyewitnesses, the law enforcement officers were affected by the sight. Roland carefully examined the terrain around the car and along the road, but could find no traces of people or vehicles. Thereupon, he called for reinforcement. The investigators who arrived immediately determined that an incident had taken place. When examining the car, they found an important clue that the young woman had not come to the forest voluntarily. The absence of shoes and the clean feet indicated that someone had carried her here. The experts determined that the incident dated back at least 5 days. The condition of her clothing, unnaturally placed sweater and shirt, improperly fitting jeans, indicated the nature of what had happened. On her right hand, she wore a friendship ring. On her left, a wedding and an engagement ring. Despite the external circumstances, the found person was in a preserved condition. No documents or clues about what exactly had happened were found nearby. However, experienced specialists suspected that the choice of such a remote location indicated a planned incident. The find was made at a remote location outside Cedar Rapids, on Gravina Road. It became clear that someone had intentionally chosen this hidden place to cover tracks. 1 kilometer away was the municipal landfill, which is why traffic on the road was rare. While the experts examined the crime scene for clues, the main questions remained unanswered: the identity of the young woman and the reasons for what had happened. The investigators in Cedar Rapids waited for the experts' conclusions. The medical examination revealed a brain injury from a violent blow to the head. The specialists suspected that the young woman lost consciousness after the first blow, and the lack of immediate help led to irreparable consequences. In the doctor's opinion, the perpetrator had possibly not planned such an outcome. After realizing what had happened, the perpetrator tried to cover the tracks. According to the expert report, the incident occurred about a week before the discovery. This confirmed the initial assumptions of the investigators working at the crime scene. The evidence found at the crime scene indicated serious circumstances of the incident. However, identifying the affected person became the priority task for the investigation. The investigators carefully examined the most recent missing person reports. The case of the disappearance of a young woman named Marine Farley caught attention. Special features, including a tattoo on her arm, helped establish a connection to the incident in the forest. The time frame of the disappearance matched the experts' assessments. The manager of the local snack bar where Marine worked was the first to raise the alarm. She became concerned when the employee did not show up for the third shift in a row. The manager emphasized Marin's exceptional reliability. She was never late and always called in when she could not come. Troubled by the long silence, the manager made her way to the dormitory. In Marin's room, everything looked normal, except for one detail. The work uniform was missing from the closet. Marin worked as a waitress at Aids Cafe. Colleagues described her as a responsible employee. According to investigation reports, she was last seen on Friday, the 17th of September, in the morning after the night shift. On the 20th of September, the manager filed a missing person report with the police. From Marin's acquaintances, the investigators learned that she had recently moved from Sioux City. The reason for the move attracted particular attention from the authorities. It turned out that Marin had married very early. Shortly after the wedding, David, Marin's husband, was admitted to a correctional facility near Cedar Rapids. Marin settled nearby. She rented a room in the dormitory and found a job as a waitress to be closer to her husband. Normally, she visited her husband almost every week, but this weekend she broke with her routine. On Sunday, a meeting was planned, followed by going to church, but Marin did not appear and was no longer reachable. Since then, no one has seen her. According to the investigations, something happened between the morning departure for work on Friday and the evening of the same day. In the course of the investigation, the officers from Cedar Rapids drove to Sioux City to speak with Marin's mother, Mary. This step proved important for the case. The woman sensed that something was wrong. She was convinced that her daughter would not simply disappear without reason. After 4 days, the same officers brought Mary the sad news. For her, it was a heavy blow. Although she had sensed misfortune, the news about what had happened left her speechless. It was particularly difficult for the relatives to remember how Marin was. She was considered the pride of the Brubaker family and was the eldest of 7 children. Everyone remembered her as intelligent, full of life, and responsible. Marin was born on the 4th of July, which according to her mother affected her character. She was radiant like fireworks and always ahead of her time. She wanted to grow up quickly. Marin loved all her siblings above everything, but she had a particularly close relationship with her younger sister Lisa. They were inseparable. Wherever Marin went, Lisa followed her. This care for her younger sister made Marin grow up early. At a young age, she met David Farley, and a strong affection flared up between them. Still very young, they decided to marry. It was a true, passionate love. David came from a wealthy family, and Marin was overjoyed with him. But her dreams of a long, happy life shattered when David was caught in check fraud. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Marin's decision to move to Cedar Rapids for his sake led to tragic events. The investigators had only a few pieces of evidence that were collected at the crime scene. Even the samples obtained had no special value until the introduction of DNA analysis. The investigators understood that the key to the solution lay in search work. They had to trace Marin's path up to the moment of encounter with the perpetrator. First, they thoroughly examined her room. When searching through personal belongings, the law enforcement officers examined Marine's diary and correspondence, but found nothing remarkable. The records showed that she was a dreamy young woman who tried to cope with life's difficulties. Only her work clothes were missing from her room. During the investigation, the officers questioned the house residents about the events of the day. The neighbors' statements provided the first important clue. The housekeeper reported that she had heard a conversation in Marine's room. She noted that the conversation was conducted in a calm tone and did not arouse suspicion. The only thing that caught her attention was that one of the conversation partners spoke with a deep voice. The housekeeper also mentioned another interesting detail. In the room, there was a distinct tobacco aroma with an unusually sweet note. Although she did not see the visitor herself, she remembered the time exactly, afternoon on the 17th of September. It was precisely on this day that contact with Marine was lost. The investigators tried to find witnesses who might have seen her after the conversation with the unknown guest. But the search remained unsuccessful. No one had seen the young woman anymore or spoken with her. Marine's relatives were at a loss. They could not imagine who the mysterious smoker could be or who might wish her harm. According to their words, Marine was universally liked, had no enemies, and never complained about conflicts. She got along easily with people. The relatives had no idea who could be behind her disappearance. The investigation gained new momentum through information from Marine's co-worker. She reported that her friend had told her about plans for Friday evening. She wanted to meet with an old acquaintance from Sioux City who had promised to invite her somewhere without giving details. This acquaintance was Bobby Moore, who immediately drew the investigators' attention. Upon checking, his difficult past with several arrests was revealed. The law enforcement agencies decided to follow this lead more closely. Marine's husband David asked her to stay away from Moore. He knew of several cases where Bobby had shown aggression toward women. He warned his wife to be careful with this man. During the investigation, new details came to light. An acquaintance of Marine reported that she had met Bobby Moore in Cedar Rapids shortly after her disappearance. He explained his presence with the desire to help in the search for his friend. When the investigators wanted to speak with Moore, they encountered a disturbing circumstance. On the day of Marine's discovery, he had admitted himself to a psychiatric clinic in Sioux City. The investigators suspected that this might be connected with pangs of conscience. The investigators suspected that this was exactly what drove him to seek medical help. They suspected him of involvement in the incident. However, if Moore had hoped that the hospital stay would protect him from the investigation, he had miscalculated. When he learned of the incident with Marine, he categorically denied any involvement. According to his words, he regarded her like a sister and had nothing to do with her disappearance. He claimed to have been in Sioux City at that time. Moore was offered to undergo a lie detector test. To the police's surprise, the test results fell in his favor. The investigators could not find any clear evidence of his involvement in the incident. Nevertheless, he could not be completely removed from the list of suspects, and soon another person attracted the investigators' attention. During the investigation, the detectives continued to gather information about everyone who had contact with Marine in Cedar Rapids in the last 3 weeks. The person Gary Castles attracted particular attention. This man did not come into the police's sights by chance. He shared a cell with David Farley. The acquaintance with Marine arose during her visits to her husband. Gary was released shortly before Marine's disappearance, when David was still in custody. When questioning Castle, the investigators examined his personal belongings and made a disturbing discovery. In his wallet, they found a photo of Marine Farley. This raised many questions for the investigators. They were particularly interested in why he kept her photo and what relationship existed between them. The suspicion arose that he had developed a special interest in her during her prison visits, and this lead had to be checked. The investigators reconstructed all of Gary's movements from his release until the evening of Marine's disappearance. There were suspicions that he showed special interest in her and began to observe her. In the interrogation room, the investigators tried to put pressure on Gary Castle. To questions about the incident with Marine, he answered negatively. Gary stated that on the 18th of September, he was far away from Cedar Rapids and could prove this. He actually succeeded in presenting evidence of his presence at another location on this day. Later, the officers examined Marine's room again to find traces of Gary's presence on that morning when the administrator had heard a male voice. However, no connection could be established between Gary and the incident. Not a single fact was found that pointed to his involvement. Although Cassell could not explain the presence of Marine's photo in his wallet, this promising clue did not help advance the investigation. The investigators then returned to the snack bar where Marine had worked and questioned her colleagues and customers again. This time their efforts brought a result. They received important information. One of the regular customers named George reported that he had seen Marine on the day of her disappearance with an unknown person who looked like a hippie. The investigators inquired with the young woman's relatives whether they knew anyone with this description. Marine's husband, David, immediately directed the police's attention to George as a suspicious person. When the law enforcement officers examined George's past, they understood David Farley's concerns. It turned out that George had offered Marine the help of his acquaintances in securing her husband's release. The question remained: was it a sincere desire to help, or a way to get closer to the young woman? Knowing her difficulties, he offered to repair her car. However, the investigators doubted the selflessness of this offer, especially given the significant age difference between them. George explained to the police that during a nighttime conversation with the young waitress, he decided to offer a helping hand. According to his words, the problems of the young woman, who found herself in a difficult life situation, touched him. The investigators doubted his story and inquired about his whereabouts at the time of Marine's disappearance. He stated that he had been at work. The verification confirmed he was indeed at the Cedar Rapids bus depot from 13 o'clock to 21 o'clock. The analysis of the time frame showed that George's work schedule did not allow him to be involved in the incident. The investigators had to look for other leads. But after thoroughly checking all possible clues, they were stuck in a dead end. By the 72nd year, the investigation had reached a dead end. The law enforcement officers checked all possible participants, but each had a confirmed alibi. For Marine's relatives, the lack of progress became a new trial in a series of emotional burdens. The family found it difficult to find the strength to cope with these circumstances. What happened to Marine affected her mother particularly hard. Alone with 6 children, she found the strength every morning to get up and care for them. The event shook the entire family deeply. Presumably, these very experiences influenced Lisa's life path, Marine's sister, who decided to work for law enforcement agencies. For many years, she used her position to remind her colleagues in Cedar Rapids how the unsolved case had affected her family. In the souls of the relatives remained a deep grief. They sought answers to the questions: who did it, and why Marine specifically? For over 30 years, the Marine Farley case remained in the archives of the Cedar Rapids Police Department. In the year 2006, a new investigator took over the case, who discovered unchecked evidence. He sent the found samples to the laboratory for modern analysis. The obtained results opened new perspectives in the investigation. After the most modern laboratory analyses, the experts succeeded in creating a genetic profile of the alleged perpetrator. The investigators hoped that the new findings and advanced investigation methods would lead them to solving the puzzle of Marine's disappearance. But the comparison of the obtained profile with the database yielded no matches. This led to a new delay in the investigations of a full 9 years. In the year 2015, investigator Matt Denlinger, after careful examination of all documents, created a list of 75 names of persons who were mentioned in the initial phase of the investigations. He was firmly determined to obtain genetic samples from each of them. This task proved to be not simple and time-consuming. The investigator had to locate all persons on the list, take their biological samples, and wait for the expert opinions. Checking so many people could take years. To speed up the process, he brought in retired Lieutenant Ken Oshburn and former investigator J.D. Smith. The team decided to begin with the first names on Denlinger's extensive list, focusing particularly on 2 persons who had aroused the investigators' interest in the 70s. They succeeded in finding Bobby Moore and taking the required sample. After the examination, he was excluded as a suspect. When the analysis of Harry Castle also yielded no matches, the investigations reached a dead end again. In the year 2018, a new investigation method appeared: forensic genealogy. This method helped solve several sensational cases in California. The teacher from Cedar Rapids hoped that this approach would also help in her situation. The investigators were convinced of the success of the new method. However, after the evidence was sent to the laboratory, it turned out that the material was too damaged for analysis. Despite the disappointment, the team did not give up and continued the search with other means. When resuming the investigations, they focused on a person who had raised questions with the previous team, George Smith, a frequent guest of the local snack bar. When checking his past, they noticed that genetic material had never been taken from him for comparison. When examining George Smith's biography, the investigators learned that he had died in the year 2013 at the age of 94. In a memorial article, friends spoke warmly about the popular businessman from Cedar Rapids. Particularly memorable was the mention of the characteristic aroma of sweet tobacco that always surrounded George. These words and the photo of the elderly Smith attracted the attention of investigator J.D. Smith. He remembered an important detail. The dormitory caretaker had mentioned the sweet smell of cigars near Marin's room on the day of her disappearance. At this moment, it became clear to the investigator exactly this man had been there that day. It turned out that George Smith was not honest when he told about his shift at the bus depot on that Friday. This circumstance prompted the investigators to examine his person more closely. Especially his excessively friendly behavior made them suspicious. The police officers of the 70s already encountered him with suspicion at that time. Now the team had to thoroughly investigate all aspects of George Smith's life in the year 1971 to understand his possible involvement in the incident. It turned out that Smith had separated from his wife shortly before the incident. At that time, he lived very close to the dormitory where Marin lived. This meant that he could easily know about her whereabouts. It was remarkable that Smith worked for garbage collection. Through this work, he knew the way to the landfill well, where Marin was later found. The investigators planned an additional investigation to obtain a DNA sample. However, the funeral home shared unpleasant news. There was no longer any possibility to take a sample. The investigation stalled again. Then Denlinger developed another approach. He decided to get a DNA sample from one of Smith's children. Matt found his daughter, who agreed to help with the investigations. The sample was sent for analysis. On the 24th of September 2021, exactly 50 years after that fateful day, the investigation results came. They confirmed George Smith's involvement in Marin's disappearance. The date of the results did not seem coincidental to the investigators. Half a century had passed. The investigators had difficulty processing what had happened. Just like Marin's relatives when they received the news they had waited 50 long years for. Investigator Matt Denlinger remembers every second of the conversation with Marin's sister. Lisa's emotional reaction has forever imprinted itself in his memory. But what surprised him most were her words. "My mother is here. Tell her." Matt was astonished. He had not expected that Marin's mother was still alive. Exactly such moments were what had once brought him and his colleagues to law enforcement. He was granted the honor of telling the elderly lady that her daughter's case was finally solved, even if after such a long time. Marin's family found no words of thanks for the investigators who had not given up and brought the case to an end. This moment was something special. A triumph of justice. A victory of light over darkness. The exact events of that day when the paths of Marine Farley and George Smith crossed remained unknown. But the collected evidence helped the investigators reconstruct the possible course of events. They suspect that George probably invited Marin to his place under the pretext of help, possibly for legal advice or car repair. When Marin came, George apparently tried to gain her attention. After she rejected his advances, the situation took a tragic turn. The situation got out of control. An incident occurred after which Marin found herself in a helpless state. Smith had probably not planned such an outcome, but his actions led to irreparable consequences. According to the investigators, he remained in his house until nightfall. When it became dark, Smith drove by car to a remote forest area. The investigators assumed that George drove there with his car. In the forest, he went to a ravine where an abandoned old car was located. After leaving traces of his presence on the trunk of the abandoned car, he disappeared from the crime scene. Although Marin's relatives were grateful for the answers received, the conclusion of the investigation stirred up old feelings they had tried to forget for years. Unfortunately, not all relatives experienced this moment. Marin's two brothers and her father never learned the whole truth about what had happened. The investigators hope that the solving of this old case carries an important message. Families of victims must not give up hope, and perpetrators should remember, the law does not forget. Sometimes emotions overwhelm a person so much that it becomes almost impossible to deal with them. Sometimes this inability to control emotions leads to irrevocable consequences. The story we will speak about reminds us of the parable of the butterfly that flies into the candle flame. Christina Robinson was born on the 19th of August 1989 in the American city of South Bend, Indiana. She was the first of 5 children in the family. Later 2 sisters and 2 brothers were added. Christina's young mother was just at the beginning of her life path when she gave birth to her daughter. From early years, Christina, who grew up in a large family, dreamed of her own happy marriage and several children. But the family idyll in the parental home shattered. The problems began when she was still very young, and eventually the father left the family. In the effort not to repeat her parents' fate, Christina dreamed of a stable family. But already in her school years, her life changed drastically after meeting an older boy. When she learned of her pregnancy, she decided, despite her young age, to become a mother. Unfortunately, Christina's chosen one proved to be irresponsible and left her alone with the baby. The story seemed to repeat her mother's fate, who after her husband's departure was also left alone with the children. Christina saw how her mother devoted herself entirely to raising the children and gave up her personal happiness. Despite her young years, Christina took her goals and dreams seriously. She understood that only hard work would help her achieve them. It was particularly important for her to be a good mother, and according to the opinion of people around her, she succeeded in this, although motherhood came to her early. In her final school years, Christina met Troy Woods, who was significantly older than she was. He worked in a store near her house. Christina herself took the initiative for the acquaintance, as she had always been attracted to more mature men, although Troy was twice as old as she was. Despite the considerable age difference and maternal warnings, a relationship developed between them. On the 14th of November 2007, shortly after Christina came of age, they married. A year later, Christina expected offspring, but on the 21st of April 2009, the family was struck by misfortune. Lillian could not overcome the congenital complications. In this difficult time, Christina sought support from her husband, but unsuccessfully. Troy was a reserved, even cool person with conservative views about life. He rarely showed feelings. Over time, the family had 4 children: Haley, Sierra, Kira, and Anthony. The people around them described Christina as a radiant, friendly person. Her maternal care could be seen in everything that concerned the children. Troy, on the other hand, tried to keep everything under his control, which provoked resistance from his young wife. Troy sought a life partner who would devote herself to the domestic hearth and household. Christina, however, still very young, dreamed of something else. She was just at the beginning of her path and tried to find herself in this world. The young woman wanted to spend time with friends, enjoy meetings, and be independent of others' decisions. Her husband, however, wanted to limit her world to domestic duties. This way of life of his young wife increasingly aroused displeasure in him. The tension in their relationship increased. Troy constantly nagged about small things, allowed himself rude remarks and accusations. After a series of unpleasant events, one of their nightly arguments that had arisen without special reason developed into a serious conflict. For the first time in their marriage, Troy became physical with Christina. She did not remain silent and turned to law enforcement agencies. To the arriving patrol officers, the man tried to present the situation in a light favorable to him, but the traces on Christina's face spoke for themselves. Troy was taken to the station and his wife decided that it was time to change her life and end this marriage. But when her husband was released, this only intensified their confrontation. After the separation, Troy behaved strangely. He tried to track his ex-wife, and during chance encounters in the city, he behaved aggressively. This forced Christina to apply for a protection order from the court. But even after receiving the document, the man continued to disregard the established restrictions. He was arrested several times, but it had no serious consequences. In the fall of 2017, Christina was diagnosed with a serious illness. Fortunately, the diagnosis was made in time, and treatment could help. After the operation, the young mother was in home recovery. During this time, Troy began again to show persistent interest in Christina. He tried to restore the relationship and bring the family together. But she made it completely clear that she saw in him only the father of her children. Christina had nothing against his contact with the little ones, but did not want to return to the former relationship. While Christina was recovering at home from the operation, she often received visits from family and friends. Regularly, her mother, as well as her two best friends, Gina and Brooke, came by. Brooke usually came with her husband, Daniel. She and Christina had known each other since early years and had practically grown up together. During this time, a strong friendship developed between them that was more like a familial relationship. On that evening, Christina's mother came to look after her daughter and stay overnight. When she came into the house, she surprisingly discovered Daniel there. At first, this aroused no particular suspicion. He often visited her together with his wife. Perhaps he had just come by to bring something from his spouse. But the situation became increasingly unusual. His wife, Brooke, was not there, and Daniel himself made no move to leave, even when the woman offered to take care of Christina herself. Moreover, he stayed until morning, which was completely beyond the framework of a normal visit. The next day, Christina's mother accidentally met a close friend of Brooke's. Concerned about the situation, she asked why Brooke's husband would come to Christina alone and stay overnight. The conversation partner was shocked. She was hearing about this for the first time. It turned out that Brooke had long suspected her husband of infidelity, but would never have suspected that he was spending time with her best friend. Betrayed by two close people simultaneously, her husband and her childhood friend, Brooke immediately set off to Christina for a serious conversation. In conversation with a friend, Christina revealed an unexpected secret. For the last 10 years, she had been secretly meeting with Dan, the husband of her best friend Brooke. Moreover, she was not planning to end this relationship. This confession triggered great outrage in Brooke. The news about the situation quickly reached Christina's ex-husband Troy. When he learned that his wife had been unfaithful to him during their marriage, he decided to use this fact to his advantage. Troy initiated proceedings for full custody of their children, formally justifying this with concern for their welfare. However, the surroundings understood. His main goal was to harm his ex-wife. Despite all the scandals and revealed secrets, the connection between Christina and Dan did not break. Since the beginning of 2018, a strange situation developed. Dan lived alternately with Brooke and Christina. His behavior followed a clear pattern. He went to one when he argued with the other. Both women knew about this but resigned themselves to the situation. Nobody wanted to break this cycle first. Naturally, this led to new conflicts. The former friends were constantly arguing. Sometimes it came to physical altercations. In May 2018, during another meeting, Christina urgently demanded that Dan leave Brooke definitively. At this point, such conversations began to provoke clear annoyance in him. A serious conflict arose between them that led to unpleasant consequences. Christine had to go to the hospital with a concussion. Despite this incident, she continued to hope for a future with her friend's husband. This complicated situation eventually led to sad events. During this time, Christine maintained contact with her ex-husband Troy, who was seeking full custody of their shared children. She tried to defuse the situation, and it seemed as if her ex-husband would behave more reasonably. In early June 2018, they took a family trip to the amusement park. Against the background of difficulties in the relationship with Dan and her best friend, contact with Troy improved significantly. Although he continued trying to change the custody arrangement, Christine was glad for the opportunity to distract herself from the difficult situation with Dan by spending time with the children and taking care of their upbringing. On the 9th of June 2018, Christine went to an important job interview. She very much hoped to get this position to improve her financial situation. Up to this point, she was largely dependent on support from her ex-husband and relatives and understood that this situation could not last forever. She wanted to gain independence, build a career, and secure a stable future for herself and her children. After the interview, Christine joyfully told her mother by phone that she had gotten the job. She was on her way and promised to call back later when she arrived home. On this day, our protagonist planned to celebrate an important event, her new job. She wanted to meet with her mother and sister, who lived only 15 to 20 minutes away. The mother waited impatiently for this meeting, but after an hour, Christina still had not called. At first, the mother tried not to worry, thinking her daughter was simply busy and had forgotten the appointment, although that was not like her at all. When she called herself, she was disturbed to find that Christina's phone remained silent. Next, she tried to send messages, both regular ones and through various messenger services, but no answer came. The whole day passed with unsuccessful attempts to make contact. In the evening, no longer able to bear the uncertainty, the mother turned to law enforcement agencies. At the police station, however, she received a sobering answer. Not enough time had passed yet to file a missing person report. She was reminded that Christina was an independent adult person who did not have to be constantly reachable. She was advised to wait 24 hours. The worried mother drove to her daughter's house hoping to find her there. But the apartment looked untouched, as if Christina had never returned. The little ones were with their father Troy at this time. Despite growing concern, the woman had to wait until the next day, hoping that everything would be clarified. The next day, when it again failed to reach the daughter, the mother turned to law enforcement agencies. This time the report was taken without superfluous questions. The situation caused great concern. A responsible woman who raised 4 children, was always reachable and took care of her little ones, had disappeared. Something like this had never happened before, which greatly troubled the mother. This behavior was not at all typical for Christina, especially given her imminent return to work and an important appointment in the next few days. Most alarming appeared that a court hearing about child custody was scheduled for the 12th of June 2018. But Christina did not appear. Her mother came to the hearing hoping to see her daughter there, but only met Troy, who also knew nothing about the situation and seemed confused. This news finally troubled the woman. She was convinced that her daughter would never miss such an important event. Christina planned to keep custody of the children, but her absence at the hearing could change everything. On the same day, the stepfather received an unusual message from Christina. She wrote about some problems and asked for help, pleading for someone to pick her up somewhere. The stepfather shared the received information with Christina's mother. She was troubled and waited for further instructions. After 2 hours, however, the stepfather received a new message that assured everything was fine, with a request not to worry the mother. This strange behavior finally convinced the relatives that something bad had happened to Christina. At this time, the authorities were already conducting intensive searches and hoping to see her at the court hearing. It was not possible to find any traces of the missing person. The police began to examine more closely the complicated life story and relationships of Christina. Initially, the ex-husband was at the top of the list of suspects. They were connected by a long series of conflicts, including custody disputes and various unpleasant incidents. The man had reasons to wish for his ex-wife's disappearance. However, he was the one who actively helped the investigations, unlike others. The former friend Brooke and her husband Daniel showed no interest whatsoever in the search for Christina. This couple also aroused serious suspicions with the police. Finally, Troy's innocence could be confirmed. Several people testified that he was in public with the children at the time of Christina's disappearance. Moreover, his concern for his ex-wife seemed sincere. Despite all disagreements, Troy did not want the children to grow up without maternal care. Christina continued trying to gain Daniel's attention, despite his relationship with Brooke. Both made it clear to her that her persistence was unwelcome. Daniel Lynn's family owned a country house in St. Louis County, state of Minnesota. Checking the mobile phone data showed that Christina's phone signal was last located there. Notable was that the property represented an extensive area that had stood empty for the last 5 years. The owners only came by occasionally to maintain minimal order. The investigators decided to search this place for traces of Christina's presence. From the outside, the house looked like a typical abandoned building, but when the law enforcement officers looked inside, they made some disturbing discoveries. Although according to Dan's family no one had lived there for a long time, through the ajar window a distinct smell of household chemicals was perceptible, which had obviously been used only recently. In the kitchen were found protective gloves for handling aggressive substances. Residents reported unusual activities around the empty house. From the 11th to the 15th of June, several cars were spotted there. Investigation of Daniel's recent bank transactions revealed the purchase of a large amount of cleaning supplies and protective equipment, similar to those found in the house. The police requested surveillance recordings from the hardware store where these purchases were made. On this day, a couple of customers was noticed in the store, a man and Brooke. The witnesses noticed their unusual behavior. The salesperson who served these visitors shared his observations. According to his words, the woman seemed particularly troubled. Brooke's gaze constantly wandered around. She was obviously in great agitation. At the end of June 2018, almost 3 weeks after Christina's disappearance, the police finally received permission to examine the empty house of the Daniel family. Inside the building, the investigators found no significant clues. The room had been thoroughly treated with cleaning agents. However, in the yard, a fire pit was discovered where interesting objects were found. Among the burned things were parts of a mobile phone, a bracelet, jeans components, and other melted objects. Particular attention was drawn to a coin from the amusement park with corresponding inscription. Exactly at this place, Christina had spent time with her former husband and relatives shortly before her disappearance. Troy confirmed this information. On the evening of the 2nd of July 2018, 24 days after the disappearance, the police completed the thorough investigation of the house and surrounding area. The investigators examined every corner of the property carefully. At some distance from the fire pit, a strange area of disturbed earth caught attention. Upon closer examination, it turned out to be a prepared depression. There they found Christina, wrapped in a blanket and tied with ropes in an unusual position. The investigators suspected that this position was chosen to save space and not attract unnecessary attention. The examination showed several injuries, including characteristic pressure marks in the neck area. Everything indicated that what had happened was caused by human hands. The experts determined that Christina had spent some time in a difficult situation and suffered serious injuries. As the main cause of the incident, the experts named pressure in the neck area. After these findings, the investigators requested an arrest warrant against 40-year-old Daniel Lynn. However, the man decided to flee, and his whereabouts remained unknown. The police also tried to find Brooke, but it turned out that she had also disappeared. In the evening, an anonymous report came to the police station that Daniel had gone to a trailer park located several hundred kilometers from his house. The investigation had information that the main person could be connected to the disappearance of their acquaintance. Daniel himself had hinted at this after her disappearance. The officers drove to the specified location, but by this time the wanted persons had already left the place. Witnesses were found who confirmed their recent presence. The locals pointed to a trailer where the couple had stayed. In the trash can, the investigators found a receipt from a nearby gas station. When reviewing the surveillance footage, they noticed Brooke and Daniel entering the store together. They were holding hands, which clearly indicated Brooke's voluntary presence with her husband and not coercion. On the 3rd of July 2018, Brooke unexpectedly appeared. She was immediately brought to the police station. According to her statements, Daniel had called her on the night of Christina's disappearance. He asked her to bring tools and some things from home, explaining that the basement on the family farm was flooded and needed urgent repair. Brooke told that when she arrived with the requested items, she found Christina there. She admitted that a conflict had arisen that developed into a serious argument. According to her words, she stayed out of what was happening. In a fit of rage, Daniel committed a thoughtless act, after which Christina showed no signs of life. Then the man led his wife outside, took garden tools and went back into the building. Brooke waited in the car for her husband. His absence dragged on unusually long. When the husband returned home, he seemed out of breath and was completely dirty. Brooke denied any involvement in the incident. She said she had nothing to do with the disappearance of her rival, but was convinced that Daniel had hidden Christina somewhere on his property. She could not name the exact location and insisted that she was not involved in the incident at all and had seen nothing. According to Brooke, she had not met Daniel again and did not know where he was staying. The investigators did not reveal that they had already found traces of Christina's presence. They simply listened and tried to find inconsistencies in the suspect's statements. But there were few contradictions. After the conversation, she was released with a request to report if new information about her missing friend should emerge. It looked as if Brooke was believed and no longer suspected. However, she continued to be observed and her frequent visits to a trailer park were noticed, where her parents owned a small house. Although Brooke claimed to know nothing about Daniel's whereabouts, gas station cameras showed them together. This indicated that they had left the city together, even if they might have separated later. The investigators decided to check the suspect's statements. When Brooke came to the trailer park again, she was already expected. The investigators entered the trailer directly after her and found Daniel there. Both immediately demanded a lawyer and refused to speak with the police. They were arrested without incident. Brooke's possible role in this story attracted particular attention from the investigators. The experts found DNA material from Daniel, but this did not prove his sole involvement in the incident. There was a possibility that his wife was involved in the incident and the subsequent elimination of traces. The crime scene had been so thoroughly cleaned that it was impossible to find any evidence. According to Brooke's accounts, Christina and Daniel had a complicated relationship. Although he often became aggressive, she continued contact with him because of her deep affection. Christina spoke about this several times with her relatives. Strong feelings prevented her from ending this relationship. After gaining her financial independence, Christina hoped to soon solve the problems with her husband and restore the connection to Daniel. Unfortunately, these plans were not destined for success. The result was tragic. Both spouses were questioned, but without success. Brooke claimed that Christina had provoked the conflict herself. As before, the husband could not control his emotions, and Dan refused to cooperate with the investigators. His defender was of the opinion that the prosecution did not have sufficient evidence. However, this assessment proved to be wrong. The motive for the incident remained unclear. Christina's former close friend continued to deny her involvement. Dan, who was over 40, could not raise the bail of $1 million and remained in custody. The investigators did not have sufficient grounds for a more serious charge. Therefore, they offered him cooperation. Finally, Daniel agreed to a lesser charge for which a maximum of 40 years could be imposed. After the deal with justice, he received 16 years in prison. His acquaintance Brooke admitted that she helped eliminate traces of the incident, which also helped avoid a long trial. To the amazement of Christina's mother and everyone who followed the case, Brooke received only 1 year. Basically, She confessed that she was nearby during the incident with her best friend, but did not intervene. However, the prosecution had no solid evidence to prove her direct involvement. After her release, she remained in contact with Daniel. Christina's relatives were outraged. Even her former husband, Troy, spoke out against this mild sentence. But attempts to review the court decision remained unsuccessful. The relatives had to accept the situation, although 4 children were left without a mother. The eldest, Haley, stayed with the maternal grandmother. The other 3 moved to their father. In conversation with journalists, Christina's mother said she wanted her daughter to be remembered not as a participant in a sad incident, but as a wonderful mother, daughter, and sister. She tried for a long time to achieve a harsher punishment for the guilty parties, but without success.